This research is about an eye-brain computer interface, combining gaze with the stimulus-preceding negativity for target selections in XR. Gaze interactions have a lot of benefits. They're intuitive, efficient, they're direct, they're swift, they replace the pointing step in point and select interactions. One of the most common approaches to gaze-based interactions is the dwell technique, where you look at an object for a certain amount of time to select it. But this technique comes with its own set of challenges, commonly known as the Midas touch, where staring at an item for a period of time can lead to unintentional selections. How do you differentiate between observing the target versus selecting the target? Previous research has addressed this through external triggers, like pressing a button on a controller, performing eye blinks, a voice command, or even hand tracking, like the gaze and pinch technique that is currently implemented in the Vision Pro. What if this physical switch could be replaced by a mental switch? And that's where the stimulus preceding negativity comes in. It's a specific type of neural activity or an anticipatory potential which is evoked when the brain expects a forthcoming stimulus. It's a preparatory mechanism where the brain quiets down the neural activity in that region that will be engaged in the processing of that upcoming stimulus. How can this SPN solve the Midas touch dilemma or basically differentiate between selecting the target or observing the target? The workflow would be something like this. An eye tracker captures the user's gaze when they look at a target. As soon as the user looks at a target, their EEG signals are measured at the occipital area and analyzed. If an SPN wave is present, that means the user is anticipating a forthcoming stimulus. This stimulus could be as simple as a selection feedback from them selecting that target. That would mean that the user wishes to select the target. And so if an SPN wave is present, that means the user wants to select the target and the system selects the target for the user. If an SPN wave is not present, that would mean that they are not expecting or anticipating any stimulus or selection feedbacks from that target and are merely observing it. So that would mean the system should not select the target. So, the contributions and hypothesis. We investigated the SPN's presence in VR using built-in eye trackers. We set forth three hypotheses. The first hypothesis, we hypothesized that an SPN wave would be present in an intent to select interaction, but not present in an intent to observe interaction for an immersive environment. Our second hypothesis was that the SPN is driven by the user's intention or anticipation of the stimulus and not by the stimulus presence itself. That means that if the stimulus provided selection feedback, but the user did not have the intention or wasn't anticipating that feedback, there would be no SPN present. The third hypothesis was as users acclimatize to target locations, that is, as they become familiar with the target placements, we hypothesized the quicker manifestation of SPN. We designed a 3D object selection task, which was broadly divided into two conditions. First is the intent to select interactions, where users selected targets in ascending and in descending order. We used a dwell-based selection with a 750 millisecond dwell timer. The targets turned red upon initial gaze, and after 750 milliseconds they turned green to signal a successful selection. It was this bright green stimuli that we expect the users to anticipate and evoke an SPN. In the control condition, which is our intent to observe interactions, we ask participants to find targets with specific number of tiny dots surrounding them and then add up their central numbers. So this would be more of a counting task where the users are observing the targets but not actively intending to select them. We split up our counting task into two conditions to specifically address our second hypothesis. First is the intent to observe, where the users do the counting task and the targets do not provide feedback after 750 milliseconds. In the second, intent to observe with feedback, post 750 milliseconds, the target turns green, indicating a selection, even though the user was not actively trying to select the target. This was done specifically to probe our second hypothesis, and we hypothesized the SPN to be absent in this condition. We recruited 22 participants, but had to reject 5 participants due to technical issues, and so we ended up analyzing 17 participants. And this was a within subjects design with every participant going through all conditions. We used the HP Reverb G2 Omnicept edition with the built-in eye tracker as the VR headset, and the Biosemi-Active 2 EEG headset with 64 active electrodes. We used 4-channel EOG to correct for ocular artifacts and to reference channels on the mastoids. So, results. To recap our hypothesis, our first hypothesis hypothesized that an SPN will manifest an intent to select but not an intent to observe. So here we look at topographical scalp maps of the intent to observe interactions without feedback. And these are average 100 millisecond average heat maps. So each head here represents 100 milliseconds, and this is from minus 900 to plus 500 milliseconds. And 0 milliseconds is when the selection was logged. And at minus 750 milliseconds is what was the first gaze at the target. So you can see that there's not much negativity happening here until the selection was logged, because no stimulus was provided here and the user was not anticipating a stimulus. In intent to select interactions where stimulus was provided and the user was actively anticipating the stimulus, we see more negativity here in this region. Our second hypothesis was that the SPN is driven by the user's intention and not by the stimulus presence itself. So in our third condition, intent to observe interactions with feedback, where stimulus was provided but the user did not have an intent to select the target, we see that an SPN is absent, confirming our second hypothesis. Here we look at the waveform plots. On the y-axis is the amplitude, and on the x-axis is the time in milliseconds. 0 milliseconds when the selection event was logged, and this waveform is the average of the occipital ROI, specifically the O1, OZ, and O2 electrodes. You can see here that the green line, which is the intent to observe interaction, displays very minimal negativity when compared to the intent to select interactions. On the right here, we contrast the intent to select interactions with the intent to observe with feedback condition. It displays a very identical waveform to the intent to observe without feedback interaction, except for this visually evoked potential here after 0 milliseconds, because stimulus was provided in that condition. Our third hypothesis was that as users acclimatize to target locations, we hypothesized the SPN's quicker manifestation. How did we test for this? How did we make the users acclimatize to these target locations? We kept the target positioning consistent for every block. So each block consisted of 20 minutes, and within each block there were 5 phases. And within each phase were the 4 tasks presented in. So for all 5 phases, participants went through the same target positioning. So they were introduced to a new target positioning in phase 1 and continued with that same positioning until phase 5, and then it will reset again in block 2 and reset again in block 3. So we hypothesized that the time required by the participants to complete the intent to select task would reduce phase by phase, because of the reduced target searches as they're getting more familiar with the positioning. And we took the average completion times from phase 1 to phase 5, performed an ANOVA, and a post-hoc test revealed a significant difference between the phase 1 and phase 5 times. And naturally we compared the negativity in phase 1 with phase 5. Here we see the topographical scalp maps again with the 100 millisecond average scalp maps. On the top here we have phase 1 and the bottom here we have phase 5. So we do not see much difference between the negativity in phase 1 versus phase 5 during the minus 400 to minus 300 millisecond window. We also did not find a significant difference for that wave. What we did was we omitted the high pass filter. Why did we do this? Because prior work also did not use a high pass filter when analyzing the SPN, because SPN being a slow wave is vulnerable to the high pass filter. And this is the same plots but without a high pass filter. So you see a more difference here between phase 1 and phase 5 now. And here we see the waveform plots. The dotted lines here represent the waveforms with the high pass filter. The magenta one is the phase 5 intent to select interaction. The blue one is phase 1 intent to select interaction. So without the high pass filter, which are the solid lines, we see much more wider difference between the negativities. So an intuitive and passive selection mechanism for case-based pointing was lacking, and we investigated the SPN's potential as a passive indicator to address this issue. We observed higher negativity during intent to select than for intent to observe interactions, which confirmed our first hypothesis. We also performed statistics, but we did not go over that in this, but do read the paper to learn more about the stats. We used the mass univariate approach for performing the stats. We use the mass univariate approach for doing the stats, which provides more robust results than spatial temporal averaging, because it corrects for multiple comparisons and also harnesses the spatial and temporal precision of EEG. Our second hypothesis proved that the SPN is tied to the user's intention and is not influenced by feedback. In regard to our third hypothesis, we were unable to show a significant difference with the high-pass filter, but we do see a significant difference without a high-pass filter, which further strengthens the direction of our hypothesis, but we're unable to reject the null hypothesis because a high-pass filter would be important in a real-world setting. And lastly, our conclusion, the SPN has the ability to discern between an intent to select and an intent to observe interaction, and has the capability to effectively address the Midas touch dilemma in case interactions. Thank you.